Good morning, and welcome to the LeaderLink e-newscast for educators. Today is February 27, 2007, and we are talking to Don Johnston, educational publisher and longtime student advocate. Don has created several supplemental and intervention programs to help struggling readers and writers, and he's written a new book entitled Building Wings, How I Made It Through School. Welcome, Don.
Thanks, Val.
Let's tell our audience, first of all, why you wrote Building Wings.
Well, I've gone into a lot of schools and I've talked to students, and I think I found it very interesting that how they liked hearing the stories that I went through growing up becoming a learner. And I wanted to reach out to more people, and since I can't speak to every student, I could write a book that really talks about my experiences. And it's interesting because I receive a lot of letters from students, and it's always interesting to me what they write to me, what they're thinking about, how they react to my book, how they've reacted to my experiences. You know, one of the first times I spoke in front of a group of students, they were fascinated by the fact that I was spanked. That's back when you could spank kids.
Right.
That was back in the dinosaur days. And so they were fascinated by that, and over half of the kids wrote to me about that and found that really amusing, that here's this adult who publishes books, and he was spanked in school. So I find it very interesting, their reactions to my stories. And I wanted to write my stories down in a way that they could think about them and turn them into learning experiences.
You were a struggling reader in school, and there was a special teacher, an 8th grade teacher, Mrs. Tedesco, that challenged you to really learn in different ways. And could you share with our audience what kinds of ways Mrs. Tedesco changed the way that you typically were learning in your school?
Sure. The most important thing, school to me was all about regurgitating information. It was about correct spelling. It was about a lot of details that I had a hard time memorizing. And what Mrs. Tedesco taught me is that learning is really is not about that. It's really about thinking. It's about speculating. It's about dreaming. It's about wondering about the universe. You know, when we become learners, that's what it's about. We explore. We don't just regurgitate dates and facts and information. And we need, as a society, to get away and redefine what learning really is about.
You had shared with me that Mrs. Tedesco inspired you to look at pictures and to turn learning into more of emotion and a visual learning. Can you talk a little bit about that?
She really didn't teach me about that. I picked that up on my own. But what she taught me was it was really about thinking. And so she loved to hear what I was thinking about things. And for the first time, all of a sudden, for the first time in 8 years, I started to raise my hand to respond to her questions and to legitimize that is really what she wanted learning to be about. It wasn't about, she didn't ask about, dates or facts. She wanted to know what we were thinking about.
So share with us a little bit, Don, the painful side of your book, where from an early age to your 8th grade, some of your teachers did not help you, and you really were somewhat of a behavioral problem.
The important thing for me is, how do we get students to see themselves as learners and not having to camouflage their behavior? The difficult thing for me was the embarrassment of being labeled stupid in front of the other kids.
Yes.
And that is a thing that I don't think, teachers who have read my books, and I just had no idea when I'm asking students to struggle in front of other students, what kind of impact that has.
Yes.
And for me, The story is really about how do you camouflage that, because I would much rather be labeled a behavior problem than to be laughed at as being stupid by my peers. So I think what we see a lot of in our schools is the camouflaging of the learning problem, of the reading problem, the writing problem, whatever that is. And we have to consider it as a camouflaging and not a behavior problem in and of itself. When I got out of graduate school, the first job I had was starting an alternative school. It was fascinating. The people that were referred to this school were referred because they were extreme behavior problems. This is back in the days when you can just discharge a student from school and say, we don't have a program for you. And most of these students that came into the program had a reading problem and couldn't read. And the school didn't know that. It was an undiagnosed thing because their behavior problems covered up their learning problems. And that's what it was like for me. If I was asked to read in front of the class, I would do everything possible, create all kind of havoc in the class so that I could be sent to the office rather than having to be embarrassed in front of my peers.
Don, you had shared with me that Building Wings is part of a larger reading series from your Don Johnston publishing company called Start to Finish. The Start to Finish books are offered in multiple learning approaches, I understand, in paperback, audio, and computer format. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that publishing line and how the book is written on a readability level for students and really more appropriately for them to get through and really aspire to learn more and to read more.
We've been publishing Start to Finish books for 8 years now. And that came out of the desire to how do we produce text that students can be successful, older students could be successful reading. And so what we do with our editing staff and our three main editors have over 100 years of editing and language experience in knowing how students acquire the language of reading. They look at the text and they write it according to sentence structure and according to certain vocabulary in order to provide a successful experience. So this is written at a gold level, which is a second, third grade reading level. And so a student that might be an eighth or ninth or even an adult can read this, and if they're at a second or third grade reading level, they can have a successful experience and comprehend what's going on in this book. Now, what if they're not at that second or third grade reading level? Then we provide audio support and in the form of CD. And so they can get audio support as they go along with the book. And then if they need more support, and they need word support, they need proper intonation support, then they can use a computer version. We use professional actors, use the correct intonation with these books. I happened to do the recording of this book, and we took a lot of takes because we had to get the right pace, the right intonation, and I'm not a professional actor. So we write this at that level, and the whole thing is how can we give students a successful experience? And it's really gratifying for me that so many students have read this book for the first time, for their first book.
Yes.
I think partly it's a story that they can relate to. And I remember one letter I got from a student said, "You tell it like it is."
Yeah.
And I think when they can relate to the story, it for one engages them in the story, provides motivation. They can see themselves in the story. The other thing is, if they can have a successful reading experience, then they're confident. And so many students give up too soon because they're not confident that they can be successful. And we want to provide that confidence.
I understand that there are many superintendents and administrators out there, even though you wrote the book for children and for struggling readers, administrators seem to be using it now for a professional development tool. Can you talk a little bit about how they're using this book?
I think the biggest point is, how do we change the perception of these students? And I really wrote the book for students. I was thinking about students when I wrote it. I actually wrote it when I went on vacation. I went on a 2-week camping trip, and every day I wrote a chapter. And in my mind, I was thinking about students. But when educators started to read it, they found it very interesting also, and they found that it really changes their perception of what to do in the classroom. I think they're always struck by my motivation to become a learner and how I had to camouflage that so much. I think one of their assumptions is that these students are not interested in learning, which really isn't the case. I think there's a lot of discussion around it, and I think probably the most important thing is the inspiration. I think Mrs. Tedesco's story, I can't tell you the number of times teachers have come up to me and said, I'm either a Mrs. Tedesco or I want to be a Mrs. Tedesco. It's become a term, and so I think it's an important thing. Teachers have get into the field of education because they want to make a difference in students' lives.
Yes.
They want to make an abrupt turnaround to those students. They don't get into education thinking about the top students in their class. They think about those students that they can make a difference in their lives. And I think it's really a story about that. And it's a story after so many years, I kept asking my mom, do you know, because she knew Mrs. Tedesco. I said, where is Mrs. Tedesco? And she said, I don't know. And so maybe about 8 years ago, I wrote a letter in our catalog to Mrs. Tedesco, wherever you are. And I did find her and locate her. She's in Florida. And I went to visit her. And I thought it was very interesting because she was all, she couldn't understand all the fuss. And but I said, Mrs. Tedesco, so what is the difference? Why were you so different than other teachers? And she says, I really wanted one thing. I really wanted to get to know the students. And I also tried to get to know the parents because I never knew when I needed to make that call. And if I had a relationship, it would have a lot bigger impact. But she says, but the bottom line is I really wanted to know what was going on in your head. And I really wanted to know you as a person. And I think so much we get so caught up in these formulaic approaches to teaching and educating, when it really boils down to our relationships that teachers have with students that make a difference. And I'm not saying, believe me, I'm in a technology company and in a publishing company. I'm not saying that isn't important, but it all starts with that relationship. And I think that's really the message for educators.
On that note, if you'd like to learn more about building wings, you can visit Don Johnston's company website. It's at www.donjohnston.com. Thank you, Don.
Thanks, Val.
Pleasure.
Sure.